In this video, I will explain about compare, contrast descriptive paragraphs and also recount paragraphs. The first we'll talk about compare, contrast descriptive paragraph. As we have learned that descriptive paragraphs allow readers to imagine the people, the thing or the object, or the place that the author is describing. In compare-contrast descriptive paragraph, the purpose is unchanged. It's still the same. Only here we try to describe two places, two objects, or two people, for example, and then try to compare two of them in a paragraph. In order to do that, we will need some criteria. So first, we'll decide what we'll need to describe, and then the criteria based on which we can distinguish one from the other. We need to set the criteria based on which we can compare one thing to the other. In this example, I decided to choose Tempe, Arizona, the United States. That is a city in Arizona. And then Edinburgh, Scotland. That is a city in Scotland, the United Kingdom. And then I will try to compare these two cities in terms of this criteria. The first is climate or weather, and then buildings, attraction, currency. Of course, this table is just for draft. You can have as many as possible as the criteria. You can have 4, you can have 5, it's up to you. So, you can decide the criteria and then you can explain based on the criteria the differences between one city and the other, for example. Here I have climate or weather. In Tempe, that is a desert and then hot. And then in Edinburgh, that is cold, windy, unpredictable. And then buildings, we have modern, dominated with earth color. And then here we have in Edinburgh many historical buildings or castles in Old Town and modern buildings in New Town, and so on and so forth. It is important to remember that perhaps we have this list or this table, but then the contents of this table do not have to be in the paragraph, all of them. So as necessary. Remember that a good descriptive paragraph should be detailed. A good descriptive paragraph should be detailed. So it is better in a descriptive paragraph to just, for example, explain two criteria in depth, in detailed, rather than to explain 4 or 5 criteria but superficial. So let's say, for example, in my paragraph later, I will just use 2 criteria, let's say climate and buildings, and then I explain these criteria in depth or in detail in a good descriptive paragraph. Remember once again that in descriptive paragraphs, details are very important. So the more detailed you write, the better. So in compare contrast descriptive paragraph, you do not have to have, I repeat, you do not have to have so many criteria to compare. But it's better if you pick 2 criteria, for example, and then use this criteria to compare 2 places or 2 people or 2 objects in more detail. That is better. Now we'll see how we can turn this table with 4 criteria into a compare, contrast, descriptive paragraph. We have here the table and then we have the paragraph. In the paragraph, I just included 2 of the top criteria here, climate or weather and buildings. I will read the paragraph, then I'll explain later. The title, Tempe, Arizona and Edinburgh, Scotland, Climate and Architecture. There are differences between Tempe, Arizona and Edinburgh, Scotland in terms of climate and architecture. First is the climate. Located in the desert area in the southwestern part of the United States, Tempe has desert climate. It's characterized with very hot temperature and very dry air. You need to always keep yourself hydrated when you are in Tempe. Edinburgh, Scotland, in comparison, is generally cold in temperature with quite unpredictable weather. In one day, it's possible that you will see snow, downpour, and sunshine. Next, in terms of architecture, most buildings in Tempe are dominated by modern desert-style buildings with mainly brownish colors. Different from Tempe, Edinburgh has more variety in terms of architecture. You can see many old historical buildings and castles in Old Town Edinburgh, whilst you can see more modern architecture in the New Town Edinburgh. In summary, climate and architecture in Tempe and Edinburgh are quite distinguishable from one another. While you are perhaps reading with me, you see that in the paragraph here, I try to compare the cities of Tempe and Edinburgh in terms of only 2 criteria, climate and buildings. But then I try to give more detail into my explanation so that the purpose of descriptive paragraph, that is allowing readers to imagine the places, can be achieved. So here in this paragraph, I just accommodate 2 criteria. I want you to pay attention to the sentences in bold. As we can see, here is the topic sentence. There are differences between Tempe, Arizona and Edinburgh, Scotland in terms of climate and architecture. In the Indonesian language, the word in terms of means dalam hal. So in terms of is very important when you are doing comparing and contrasting with certain criteria. Alright, we have written the topic sentence here. climate, and architecture. So we'll not talk about anything else. We'll just focus on climate and architecture in Tempe and Edinburgh. That's it in this paragraph. And then if we take a look at the conclusion, we see that it is the restatement of the topic sentence actually. In summary, climate and architecture in Tempe and Edinburgh are quite distinguishable from one another. Quite distinguishable. How can I have quite distinguishable? After I explain all the differences. They are different. The weathers are different. The buildings and architecture are very different. That's why I can say they are quite distinguishable from one another. If we focus our attention to the words in green font, we'll see those are very important. In comparison, that is like a transition. In the Indonesian language, in comparison means sebagai perbandingan. Yeah. In terms of architecture, means dalam hal arsitektur. And then we can also have different from blah blah blah. Berbeda dengan blah blah blah. Those are very important transitions. Of course, you can have other transitions that you can find on the internet. These transitions help your paragraph to read smoothly, to allow readers to read your paragraph smoothly and they can understand your writing very well with the help of these transitions. So this is an example of compare, contrast, descriptive paragraph. This paragraph is having only one idea. The idea is to compare and contrast Tempe and Edinburgh in terms of climate and architecture. One idea here is located in the topic sentence. Next, we'll talk about recount paragraph. I will just read. A recount paragraph tells a story. It tells about a series of events that happened to the narrator, the author. It is usually told in time sequence with a definite beginning, middle, and end. Recount almost always uses past tense. And then the last one, the conclusion of a recount paragraph can be a personal remark of that experience rather than summarizing the contents of the paragraph. So actually, in terms of difficulty, I think writing recount paragraph should not be very difficult. It is just you telling what you have experienced. It tells a story, right? And then it tells a series of events. Time sequence, meaning what happens one after the other. So in sequence. In sequence. Because recount tells about something happening in the past, then it's very understandable that when you write a recount, you use past tense. Number 5 is very interesting. The conclusion of a recount paragraph can be a personal remark of that experience, rather than summarizing the contents of the paragraph. If we still remember, when we are writing sandwich paragraph, the conclusion sentence is the restatement of the topic sentence. Of course, I believe that you remember in sandwich paragraphs, the conclusion sentence is the restatement of the topic sentence. It is still the case in recount paragraphs. It is still the case. However, in recount paragraph, you have more liberty. You have more liberty or more freedom in writing the conclusion sentence. That is, you can write your conclusion sentence in the form of a personal remark of that experience that you've just written. So, for example, you use adjectives like beautiful, unforgettable, mesmerizing, and then terrifying. We'll see later in the example. So, I'll repeat. When you are writing a recount paragraph, you basically write about past events or past experiences. And then you write it in past tense. I will read this paragraph. Perhaps you want to read aloud with me while I'm reading this, and then I will explain later. My first nerve-wracking solo singing competition. I had a nerve-wracking and unforgettable individual singing competition experience. It was when I was in my second year of high school. My friends saw a group singing competition advertisement in Instagram. They registered themselves and asked me to join too. When they asked me, at first I was rejecting it because I had no experience and courage to sing alone on a stage. My only singing experience was singing in a choir, but they forced me to join it. So I registered myself and joined the competition along with my friends. We practiced every day. We even skipped some classes. When it was the day we competed, I was super nervous and I even had difficulty breathing. The competitors were very good and skilled. We did our best and sang from our hearts. Surprisingly, we won the competition and won the grand prize. I was really proud of myself and my friends. I was glad I joined the competition. From that day, I became confident and joined several other singing competitions. I will never forget that meaningful competition. Alright, from this paragraph, perhaps you have noticed that it's written in sandwich paragraphs. We have the topic sentence and then we have the conclusion sentence. We have here nerve-wracking, unforgettable individual singing competition. So the whole supporting sentences here will talk about the individual singing competition experiences. It is told in sequence, one after the other, and then ended with the end result of the competition, which is the author won the competition. And then as you can see here, the conclusion, as I said here, is the personal remark of the author. I will never forget that meaningful competition. So instead of summarizing all the events that the author has mentioned in the supporting sentences, the author chose to write a sentence summing up the feeling about the experience. Because it is like a personal remark of feeling, you will likely use adjectives. Some adjectives can be used to describe certain experiences. I am sure that you can find it yourself in the internet or in the dictionary. Basically, it's the remark, personal remark of the experience that you have explained in the supporting sentences. So, if we take a look at this paragraph at glance, I think perhaps most of you think that writing recount is not very difficult. It's not difficult. It's just telling past events. There is, you don't need to Google. You don't need to find any information, unlike writing expository paragraph, for example. But actually, writing recount can be quite tricky. This is what I want you to be careful. So when writing a recount, writers or authors tend to be too excited to share their experiences. And I can understand that. You have a very meaningful experience to share, and you are very eager to share it with me and with the class. It is just normal, but you need to be careful. A paragraph has limits. I do not want you to write an essay in the form of a paragraph. So you just write a topic sentence and then you write so many supporting sentences and then you end it with a conclusion sentence, but it's like almost a page. So I think it's too long. So try to explain past event that is quite simple to be written in, let's say, 10 sentences. So do not be too ambitious. Why I am discouraging you to write too many sentences? First, when you are writing recount, you will write it in past tense. Past tense is generally more difficult than present tense. So if you are just too excited to share your past experience with others, and then you neglect the accuracy of your language, so the paragraph will not read very well, even though in terms of quantity, it's a lot. So I encourage you to write a short recount paragraph with a good organization and a good accuracy of language, rather than just writing a very long paragraphs with poor organization and with poor grammar. Lastly, I have a quote from a Roman philosopher, Marcus Tullius Cicero. If I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter. This quote can mean that quantity doesn't always signify quality. Even Cicero preferred shorter letter with better quality. Thank you and happy practicing.